We spend a third of our lives at work, and we want to make sure that we're happy there and that we're not just like waiting for 5 o'clock or whenever our shift is over. There are just some workplaces that are not great environments, but you as an individual showing up can make a difference. So do what you can to connect to the people that are around you and help others feel supported and have their back. That makes a really big difference. And like if you're under stress and in a tense situation, you are not using all your brain functioning. You're much more likely to be going back to sort of like those more primitive functions and fight or flight. So when we are relaxed and feel comfortable and supported, that is actually a great sign for productivity.
Do you think money takes up more life space than it should? On this show, we discuss with and share stories from artists, authors, entrepreneurs, and advisors about how they mindfully minimize the time and energy spent thinking about money. Join your host, Jonathan Dio, and learn how to put money in its place and get more out of life.
Hey there, welcome back. On this episode of the Mindful Money Podcast, I'm chatting with Dr. Kelly Harding. Dr. Harding, MD, MPH, is an expert in psychiatry, mind-body medicine, and public health. She teaches at Columbia University in New York. She wants to make the world a kinder and healthier place for everybody. Dr. Harding has appeared in media basically across the board today. Good Morning America, BBC, New York Times, Washington Post, Prevention, LA Times, Oprah Magazine, Parents, and others. She's the author, and the reason I wanted to have her on the podcast, of The Rabbit Effect: Live Longer, Happier, and Healthier with the Groundbreaking Science of Kindness. Dr. Harding, welcome to the Mindful Money Podcast.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
Absolutely. I'm excited for the conversation. So first, let the audience know, where do you call home and where are you connecting from?
So I live in New York City in Manhattan. And it's funny because I think when it comes to the term home, I'm actually kind of home wherever I am. It doesn't matter. I lived all over the United States when I was a kid. So many places feel like home.
So you lived all over. Did you grow up anywhere, or was it like 2 years here, 2 years there?
Yeah. So listening to your podcast, one of the things that struck me as sort of, where we get our ideas about money and, our mindset around money a lot of times. And my parents were almost like digital nomads before that was a thing. And my mom was an educator and my dad always did investments in the stock market. And I think I went to 9 different schools before ninth grade. So all over the United States, they had a deal with me that in high school, wherever I stayed, I could stay for the 4 years. So that ended up being in Nevada. So.
Wow. So, 9 schools before ninth grade, that's a lot of moving around. I'm wondering what that taught you about money.
It's also interesting because initially my parents had created a lot of affluence for themselves and then actually lost it all in a stock market crash. And I would say the big lesson for that for me was that, we survived, we got through it. And it wasn't always easy, but it also made me realize that it's okay to take risks in life because whatever happens, you're going to figure out a way. There's a quote that I like that's often attributed to John Lennon that in the end, everything's going to be all right. And if it's not all right, it's not the end. So I think the other thing that really taught me, because my parents remarkably managed to continue to do very fun things despite us not having money. So it also taught me that I think a lot of times when you think about how do I want to live, like what's the good life, money is a piece of that, but it's not the whole story. And actually you can get like really creative and have a lot of fun without a lot of budget. So money is nice. It certainly helps grease the wheels, but at the same time, it's not a necessary prerequisite as long as you have enough to eat and a place to sleep for fun.
The whole concept of, and I've thought about this and talked about this for years and years and years, the whole concept of enough is enough. And then we get bent out of shape about more. We get better job, more income, and we just get on this treadmill. And I'm sure we talked about this, or you researched some of this stuff in your own history and your own academic work. But can you name like one experience? Maybe the stock market crash is the thing, but that one experience that you had growing up that sort of translates into a lesson that you took out of your childhood towards money or about money.
I mean, that probably was the really big lesson. And I know it's a theme that I hear from a lot of your guests is if you're going to invest, it's less about things, more about experiences. And, the studies really back that up in terms of what makes us happy ultimately. And I think as a medical doctor, I, of course, know you can't take it with you. Those memories are really priceless. And so just give you an example. I have the choice of do I buy an item or do I buy or invest in an experience. I like 99% of the time go with the experience because that will last and create so much joy, much more so than an item that people eventually on the hedonic treadmill just sort of it goes into the background. My son turned 13 and he loves the Miami Heat. So we decided to make a family trip out of going to see the Miami Heat play and had a great time as opposed to buying him, some other thing that or device or something that he wanted. So yeah, so those kinds of things are, I feel like a good use of money and time.
I'm wondering early on when you had the childhood experience, did you pick up on that then, the experience versus the thing, or is it something that you've picked up on because now you've read the academic research about it?
Yes, I didn't really have a choice, right? So, we just didn't have the cash. So we learned to make do with what we had and like the place you're eating or the like how fancy the meal is. But it's like, what can you bring to the experience that connects you to other people, that adds warmth, that adds laughter, joy. Like those are all things that are just totally intangible. And it doesn't matter whether you're sitting over a very expensive meal or like a hamburger at your favorite spot.
Or a good burrito. A good burrito, always inexpensive. I love a good burrito.
Yeah. It's funny I chose hamburger as my option because I'm actually a vegetarian, but so burrito. So for people who are listening, I'm a physician and my area of study has been what I guess the general public would probably call mind-body medicine. I got really interested in medical school about what it was that kept people healthy despite really serious illnesses. And also the flip side of that, what were sort of medical mysteries, like, patients who would come in not feeling well, not functioning well, but we couldn't find anything when we would go to look on labs and imaging and sort of trying to understand what is that all about. And so that led me really on this incredible learning journey that I feel very fortunate to have traveled on that included things like, studying as much as I could about adult medicine and psychiatry and the overlap between the brain and the body. And then I actually even did a research fellowship in medically unexplained symptoms at Columbia. And then that all led me to public health. And it was actually a study about rabbits that sort of helped create the pivot. And that's where the name of the book, The Rabbit Effect, comes from.
Tell us the story. I read the book, so I know the story, but I love the story.
Sure. Back in the late 1970s, there was a really lovely researcher by the name of Dr. Robert Neerum. He's a basic scientist in studying the heart health of rabbits and the connection between diet and heart health. He did this really straightforward experiment where he fed all these basically genetically identical rabbits a high-fat diet. He expected the same health outcome. And instead, one of the groups of rabbits had a 60% difference in their health outcomes. And he couldn't figure out what was going on. And he was really a top-notch researcher. So he thought it was something wrong with the study. Everything checked out. And then they noticed that the group of rabbits that did better were being cared for by the same researcher. And her name was Marina Levesque. She not only was doing the sort of standard rabbit protocol, but she was also petting the rabbits. She was picking up the rabbits, petting them, really giving them love and kindness. And Dr. Neerum, who was just an extraordinary thinker, thought, well, could it be that somehow the social world is impacting the biology of these animals? And he thought, let's find out. And so he redid the study with really tightly controlled conditions. And sure enough, he got the exact same result. And it was really staggering. They published it in Science. And it was at the time just like a totally out there concept. And now we have, decades of data about how our social world and how we're treated in our social world impacts our health on every level. And it's truly remarkable. So I felt like this was in a large way what explained that mystery that I was after. It's, of course, our social health matters to our health and our Of course it does. And it turns out it's a huge percentage. It's way more than I ever imagined when I went to medical school, but it's the major determinant of our health, even more than our genetics, which is shocking.
I want to get into the numbers in a second, but while I was preparing, this quote popped into my head. I just want to see if you know where it's from. You treat a disease, you win, you lose. You treat a person, I guarantee you'll win no matter what the outcome. Do you remember where that quote's from?
There are a couple different people who have similar quotes, so I'm not exactly sure who might have said that one.
That's Patch Adams, the movie Patch Adams. Such a good movie, but it's like, it's so, I don't remember that movie, but it's like, it's so much about this topic. It's, you love the patient, you take care of the patient has better outcomes. But even if they don't, they live better through even if they still die or whatever, they still have better outcomes and that they feel better through the whole process. That's kind of that's in a nutshell, isn't it?
That is. And also kind of spooky and weird, because just this morning I was thinking of that movie. So I should have gotten the quote because Robin Williams' name came up and I was thinking about, I should rewatch that movie. So this is yet another sign I should. So, I think for people who are listening, you can just kind of think about it. Like it makes a difference. Like when you're not feeling well, but you have a trusted friend by your side or a trusted doctor or a trusted therapist, somebody who gets you and sees you and you feel really has your back. Like, it helps immeasurably. And it turns out it actually is good for our health, and it has all these knock-on physiological effects as well. So it matters. And it used to be thought that, it was sort of about the outcome and less the process. But now we've really understood that, in fact, it really does matter how you're feeling in the moment. And particularly if it's going on for a prolonged period of time, that's where we have to really pay attention.
Yeah. So talk about some of the numbers, the sort of the statistics around the limitations of the actual medical care, the sort of the health, care versus the importance of that element of kindness. I think in the book you draw some numbers, like healthcare accounts for this much of healing, care and kindness accounts for this much of healing.
Yeah, so this was actually pretty shocking. When you look at the population data, it's sort of estimated that medical care probably only counts, it's a critical part, but it only counts for about 10 to 20% of our overall health. So it certainly in an emergency, it's this extra important. However, there are other factors at play too that we have to look at. Now, genes, we know about that. One of the things that I talk about in The Rabbit Effect is this whole emerging field of epigenetics, which has just been fascinating. It turns out our genes are not as fixed as we once thought that they were, and they are responding to our environment, which means that that's why sometimes people have delayed onsets of illness, or you see illnesses develop faster than you would expect them sometimes too. And then the other big piece of this, of course, diet, lifestyle, but the other big piece of it is our social world. And, that's accounting for, like, if you look at sort of like the pie of health, it's well over 50% what's accounting for our health and well-being. And so that for me was just really wild. And actually, I wrote The Rabbit Effect right before the pandemic, and then kind of feel like I've been on a 5-year book tour because we all got a big lesson in public health. And I think many of us experience the challenges of loneliness and social isolation also during the pandemic. So we realized how much kindness and connection really matter to our health and well-being. And, many of us are still feeling the repercussions of that. So those are some of the numbers. I have tons and tons of data in the book, but the numbers all pretty consistently show the same story. And I think that's what's so compelling is when you look at it all together, it really comes down to it. Like, we almost don't need like yet another study to show it actually really matters that you are treated with kindness and support in all the areas of your life, from, how you treat yourself to your home, to your schools, workplaces, neighborhoods, and broader communities. It really makes a difference.
I want to just be very clear. In the last 6 months, I've read a lot of articles sort of debunking a lot of studies that were not, well founded, or not, the data wasn't culled correctly or whatever. So there's many studies that say that our health derives more than 50% from our social spaces.
When you think about, what does your social world look like? We know it in part because of also the negative impact of these things. So things like adverse childhood experiences, we now understand have a greater impact on our health than we understood. And every other person you pass on the street has a history of trauma. Things like education really matter to health, which nobody really thought of as part of education or as part of well-being, but the statistics are actually quite staggering when you look at the impact of education. For instance, there's some work that's been done by Dr. Wolf in Virginia showing that when you look at the population data, for every one life saved by biomedicine or medicine, education saves 8. And there's other studies backing that up that seems to have both direct and indirect effects, which is fascinating because we don't typically think of education as part of our health package. But, for people who are listening, good for you. This is also part of your education, is having these conversations. There's things like how we're treated in our workplaces really matters to our health, it turns out. In fact, some of the studies have shown it's like the major determinant of your health, which is, really unexpected and fascinating. It's just like every area. And in the book, I break it down by these different areas, but it's just fascinating to look at it. And, the other thing is the longest running study, which is the Harvard study that, started with some famous first participants, including, a future Supreme Court justice, and JFK was in the group of students being studied, found surprisingly that the best predictor of health in your 80s was your relationships in your 50s. And that was a totally unexpected finding, not something they were looking for. And they found that across the board that, if you want to really invest in your health, you got to invest in your social connections. So, going to the doctor, doing the basics, like absolutely, please do those things. We want to take care of our bodies in every way we possibly can. Exercise, eat well, but also think about who are you eating with, and also how are you spending your time. Jonathan, I just want to share with you one thing that since I wrote The Rabbit Effect, and I touch on it in there, but it's just exploded, is the data around purpose and health. And I think that's really fascinating because it also ties into, of course, our financial health, because a lot of times we hope that how we're getting reimbursed in the world also ties into our greater sense of purpose. But it's wild. There's studies that show that the more that we're able to have a sense of purpose in life, we live longer and we're less likely to have things like cognitive decline, which is also really striking because, biologically, how does that work? It's fascinating. So
before I went to grad school, my degree is in philosophy, right? So I think about Aristotle and talking about the whole person and the different kinds of love, the importance of meaning in our lives and what matters in our lives. And I wonder if the full arc of, I don't know how many hundreds of years ago that was, but it's this full arc. And now we're at social media. We have an epidemic of loneliness, and there is just despair, some tied to the pandemic, but it's actually expanded since the pandemic. So what are you doing? Like, what is in the day-to-day, what do you do to sort of complete this social circle? How do you activate to make it better for yourself?
Yeah. So if you look at like every single day, you have choices and you have hundreds of choices. And I forget the exact number, but it's an astounding number of choices how you want to spend your time during the day. So what it comes down to is when you look at sort of like, well, what are the health protective things? What are the buffers for stress? What lower our cortisol and our blood pressure and do all these good things? And, kindness actually is it's a proxy for that pro-social behavior. And you have infinite moments where you can offer kindness to other people. And kindness is really like social glue. It connects us to other people. So, just if for those listening, like think of a moment of kindness that you've seen recently or done recently or observed recently. It's so funny. It doesn't matter whether you're the giver, the receiver, or the observer, you all benefit from an act of kindness. So not all of them matter. But maybe if you just think of a moment or something that happened to you. I don't know if you have one you want to share, Jonathan.
You said something there. It doesn't matter if you're the receiver, the giver, or the observer. You don't get the same benefit, but you get a benefit. So I think the lesson is go outside, like go among people, because you're going to see it, even if you're not participating in it.
Yeah. And so actually it gets even weirder. So it turns out that recalling acts of kindness also provide a benefit. So as much as you can, be around people, because we know that social isolation is the number of people you see during the day, and that it's not great for us. Even if you don't feel subjectively lonely, it shows that there's benefit to being around people. But when you're around people, try to connect with them. And an easy way to do that is to offer kindness. It can be like looking people in the eyes. It can be saying hello. It can be opening a door. It can be, paying for someone's coffee or helping someone out who needs a helping hand. Like it's really infinite and it's up to you what's comfortable for you. But those little tiny things that we kind of take for granted and social niceties actually really add up when it comes to our health and well being. So I would encourage listeners to do that. And I think it's funny because in our sort of like hustle and grind culture, sometimes of trying to make a lot of cash, we forget sometimes those social niceties actually really matter to people. And in fact, the World Happiness Report just had some really interesting data that when you look at acts of kindness, they often make people happier than, getting a significant raise, which is like kind of amazing because it costs nothing, but can give us a pretty great happiness boost. So there's wealth in many ways.
Yeah, for sure. I want to go to the workplace in a second, but you sort of challenged me and I deviated from it. So I had this experience. I was in a bar the other night. I recently moved to Oakland, so I'm in a new sort of space. I used to live in Berkeley. And you know how you hang the coats on a hook underneath the bar, right?
Yeah.
So I was sitting at the bar. A woman had hung her coat there. I hung my coat over it. And she came up and she was trying to get her coat and she just put her hand on my back and said, "Excuse me." And we had this just little interchange and it hit me that it was just a warm, kind, we laughed a little bit. She grabbed her coat, she went away, never to be talked to again. But it was just this beautiful moment. And we were both kind to each other, "Excuse me," got out of the way. "Here's your coat." It literally stuck with me for the last 5 days. Like it's a beautiful thing.
Right, exactly. And not only that, but there's this knock-on effect to or a ripple effect or virtuous circle, if you like that term, where I suspect, because you probably felt like a mood uplift from that. And in fact, we do feel happier that we're actually more likely to go out and be kinder to someone else in our path that, that we encounter. So of course, this works in reverse too. So we want to be mindful of that. But that actually, Jonathan, reminds me, since your listeners are interested in success and wealth and money and things like that, is it used to be thought that people would be happy once they were successful, but it looks like it might be the other way around, that happiness is actually a predictor of future success, which is just kind of one of those fun things because it means that actually investing in ourselves and investing in our education and our well-being is actually a great way to have more success in our lives going forward too.
I'm going back to this concept of recalling kindness as a potential benefit for happiness and well-being. Have you heard of the loving kindness meditation? Like where you sit down and you say, "May you be happy." You think about someone that's really close to you. May you be happy. Mm-hmm. May you be healthy. May you live with freedom and may you be free from suffering, right? And then you think about someone that you may have just met at a grocery store, don't know them well. You do the same, may you, may you, may you. Then you think about someone that you don't like or that is a pain in the butt or someone that you have an argument. And you do that, you wish them the same kinds of things. I noticed that people who spend a lot of time in loving kindness meditation are just spreaders of kindness. They're just open and sharing with the world and they're loving. I didn't really put that together, but they have more well-being. They're experiencing well-being themselves because of the practice. And then they're out in the world just sharing it. And that pays it forward.
Yeah, right. It's so
more
wild
loving kindness.
How that works.
More loving kindness.
I think it's also really fun and empowering because especially we were talking briefly about, we happen to be recording this podcast during what feels like a very tumultuous time sort of in the stock market. I think when you feel like things are out of control, sometimes you actually can remember the stuff that is within your control and how you show up in the world, how you think, taking time to meditate. Like those are things you can control. Doing loving kindness meditation is something you can control. And it totally impacts your day and it impacts the people around you. And actually there's studies on that, you are actually having an effect on like a friend of a friend by your showing up happier is wild, but fascinating. So actually, just for you listening, just be aware, even when things feel so chaotic, you have so much power to make things better for yourself and others.
I just want to sit with that for a second because I think we do forget. I think we forget. We get overwhelmed and we forget. Coming back to workplace, because of the rat race, because of the grind, because we spend a lot of time working. So what can we do? So two questions. What can an employer do? What can the workplace do to sort of build a more connected or more kind workplace? And then what can we do when we're at work to do that?
Okay, so Great questions. And also, let's think this through because we spend a third of our lives at work and we want to make sure that we're happy there and that we're not just like waiting for 5 o'clock or whenever our shift is over. So, this is another place I encourage people to feel empowered because it's not always going to come top down, right? Like, there are just some workplaces that are not great environments, but you as an individual showing up can make a difference. So, we know that if you have like a best friend at work, you're actually far more likely to be happy and more engaged in your workplace. So, do what you can to connect to the people that are around you and help others feel supported and have their back. That makes a really big difference. And the irony is, we know, Jonathan, that the way our brain works is we're actually better problem solvers when we feel supported and relaxed, right? Like if you're under stress and in a tense situation, you are not using all your brain functioning. You're much more likely to be going back to sort of like those more primitive functions in fight or flight. So when we are relaxed and feel comfortable and supported, that is actually a great sign for productivity. I'm just going to add on to that one layer. There is this insane data that has just come out as part of the World Happiness Report in 2025. And it's been done from the folks at Oxford, and it's using the database from Indeed, which is like thousands and thousands of people. And I forget their end, but it was humongous, that showed basically the happiest workplaces are the most productive and the most financially successful. So there's really a business case for this as well in terms of making sure that our workplace is a happy place to be, especially if you're thinking long-term success of a company. So there's that. The other thing is when it comes to workplaces, and this is something I think about a lot in medicine, is we tend to not be as kind if we're in a rush. And so there's like tons of evidence on this, and we tend to be more biased. We just go like straight to like our go-to responses and don't necessarily connect with the other person bias. So if you can, even if you're in a tense situation, slow down a little bit, even if it means like taking 10 seconds before you respond to someone or like taking a pause to connect with someone before you dive into the content. Odds are you're going to be actually nicer and kinder and able to better solve the problem or challenge that's in front of you, which is sort of an easy thing to do, but hard to do in practice a lot. I think about that with meditation, right? I forget, was it Gandhi that said, I feel like there's a quote about like, if you have a really busy day, then they're going to have to meditate twice as long that day. So
it's a good story about the guy who goes to the monastery and says, if I really dedicate myself and I really work hard, how long until I'm enlightened? And the monk says, well, probably 10 years. And he goes, that long? What if I do twice as much and I work even harder? And the monk says, well, probably 20 years then. Like don't grind it out. Right? I love it. Yeah. Love the story.
Yeah.
I mean, the workplace has changed since the pandemic. It's hybrid, remote workplace. Yeah. How does that factor in? Some of my best friends they go to work once a week. I go into the office once every couple of weeks. I don't go in every week, not even a single day.
Yeah. Yeah. So the workplace has really changed. And it's funny though, because I still meet a lot of people who feel somewhat chained to a desk, even though they're not theoretically anymore chained to a desk. So like our old mindsets sometimes travel with us to new places. So I would challenge you to think about, are there ways that if you are working alone, and I know a lot of loneliness happens for remote workers because we're missing those like conversations at the water cooler that used to happen, is how can you build that in for yourself or your company? I know some of the companies I've consulted with now do, retreats periodically. They're much more intentional about bringing people together. They'll sometimes do these sort of like meet and greet things that allow people to get to know each other as human beings outside of just sort of work stuff. Or, can you go work somewhere that there are other people around? Can you meet people for lunch? That's one that's been a really great data point that it shows that it's, we are much happier if we're meeting people for meals, whether it be lunch and or dinner, which is something to consider. There's this data from Julianne Holt-Lunstad out in Utah, who's just wonderful and has done a lot of the meta-analysis looking at loneliness that the most recent Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, has used, that loneliness is as bad for us as smoking about 15 cigarettes a day and other well-known risk factors like heavy alcohol use and even being overweight. So when you think about your health, like add socializing into it as seriously as you do like going to the gym or eating healthy or getting enough sleep, is what I tell patients at least.
I could actually go down a complete sideways track here. I'm trying to avoid that, but yeah, it's very difficult.
I'm so interested. Where are you going?
Well, after not, so I'm a workaholic. Like I've been a workaholic forever. I'm slowly trying to pare that back. It's changed my entire relationships with lots of people. I've added back some friends,
Yeah.
and it's very difficult for me to reach out on a regular basis and say, "Hey, let's get lunch," or "Hey, let's get dinner," or "Hey, let's go for a drink," or "Hey, let's."
Yeah.
It's just there's a hurdle there, and I know every time I do it, it's just warm and it's great and it's wonderful. But then the next time, that's done. And now I got to do it again. And it's a slog. It's like, frankly, it's like meditation. You have to return your attention to your breath, and you have to do it over and over and over and over. As you do it over and over, it gets easier. And I know that. And I know this will get easier too, but I'm not too easy yet. And it's a slog. So anyway, that's what I was going to go to.
So actually, it's really interesting because you're right. And what you're describing is the difference between sort of like a habit versus like an outcome, or I think they call it a telic activity versus a telic activity, where it's like, or going to the gym, right? Like you got to exercise every day or the muscles are going to atrophy. And our socializing is the same way. Like for the pandemic or for people working at home, oftentimes our social muscles kind of atrophy. So we have to be kind of intentional about doing those reps. And that might be meaning to be more intentional about setting up those lunchtime gatherings or coffees or whatever it might be. I think the other thing is there's this thing called the loneliness loop that you can get stuck in. And I know, like, I've seen myself get into it, where if you're not sort of intentional and you just sort of make it a practice, it feels like a big hurdle to like reach out to somebody and say, hey, you want to grab coffee? So the more you do it, the easier it becomes. It's actually not unlike exercise in that way, right? Like if you run a half of a mile or a mile every day, all of a sudden that becomes no big deal. Sometimes if that feels overwhelming, you can break it down and start smaller. So I made this policy with myself. If I am free and I think of someone, I will just send them a little text to say like, and I happen to have my phone with me, like I'll text to say like, hey, I'm thinking about you. Just wanted to say hi, or, whatever it is, or just want to check in. And it's funny because when you're on the receiving end of those notes, it's so nice, right? Like to know somebody's thinking about you can totally change the course of your day. And so I'm just trying to do that a little more intentionally. And then it makes like asking someone out to dinner feel less like a big deal kind of. And I'm a total introvert. So all this, I have to like also muster up a little bit of courage to do it.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. So just that actually is something that I think it was a Huberman podcast that actually suggested that outreach to your close friends on a regular basis, just to say I'm thinking of you, or I really appreciate you, and that sort of builds that muscle, like you said. That's like the first rep. And then later you say, hey, let's go for coffee or dinner, but you start with just, hey, thinking of you. And I think, of course, make it easy first step. It's nice.
Yeah. And actually, I want to, because you asked if we have time, I've heard you ask other guests, so I'm just going to preempt it here about something you've changed your mind on recently. And I have to say, actually, being intentional about meeting up for meals is something I have totally changed my mind on, because the data just says it is so good for us. Like it is very much the culture in medicine to just like, eat at your computer, writing notes, and like not to socialize. And I feel like, having seen the data, I'm not guilty when I like decide I'm going to go out and meet a colleague for lunch or meet up with a friend or a family member. Like I am much more intentional about that, because the data shows, one, I'll come back to my work and actually like be much more efficient. And two, it's good for my health and well-being and theirs. The most recent World Happiness data showed that we want to aim for, out of a possible 14 lunches and dinners a week, about 13 would be optimum happiness. So I suspect most Americans come in around like 6 meals, just so you know, as a benchmark. But the happier countries often are closer to that 13. And interestingly enough, 14 meals, actually the happiness dips for some reason. I'm not sure why that is. And there's theories about that, but having some choice about eating with people is good.
The only way that would functionally be possible in my life is if I lived with my family, right? If everyone was there and we had meals together, breakfast and dinner, and maybe lunch in the office or something like that. So I wonder if that speaks to the data about why people who are in families or partnered are happier, if it's just because they're eating regularly with somebody.
it's thought to be sort of a proxy for social connection, right? So, it turns out that countries that did better on the happiness report also tend to have more intergenerational households, or, people living in proximity to people that they love. And it's harder. I feel like technology is so wonderful that it allows us to connect and have this conversation, but on the flip side of it, of course, it can be really isolating in its own way. So we just have to be much more mindful about that.
I want to give you a chance to talk about Our Kind of Club. So just tell us about Our Kind of Club.
Oh, so I, along with two dear friends of mine, actually from Berkeley, close to where you are, one who's a career diplomat and one who is a leadership executive and has worked in HR for many years, we decided that we needed to do something to take all this data and put it into action. And so we created something called Our Kind of Club. Our goal is lofty. It's to create a kinder and healthier world for all. And the idea is that we can do what we can, knowing the data and the science of kindness, to make things better for each other. So right now we have a number of different offerings. We've been doing it now. It's been about a year and a half, and we've had people from 18 countries join us. And, it's been a challenging year and a half in the world, but it's been so heartwarming. And so one of the things we do is a kindness campfire, and it's free. People gather online. You can share stories of kindness and hear stories of kindness. It is so uplifting. I have gone on days that have been really tough, and I always leave uplifted, and it's remarkable because that's what the data shows. And it turns out that it's really easy to do. Our goal is to make that sort of widespread and a drop-in thing so that people could feel that sense of connection when they're having a hard day. How do you have conversations with people who maybe have different opinions than you, but still treat each other with kindness, because part of life isn't just being nice and polite, but also being kind and trying to understand where someone else is and curious where someone else is coming from. Yeah, so we're doing that. You can find it on Our Kind of Club is our website, which was actually designed by my now 13-year-old son. So it's got some funny animals on there, but it's great. And it will get you to where you need to go. Or my website, kellyhardingmd.com as well. You can check it out on there and sign up. We also have a dose of kindness newsletter that you can get. But yeah, thank you for asking. It has been an incredible journey. We've been doing live campfires too. We just did one at the World Happiness Summit that probably had about 1,000 people at it. So it was great.
Wow. Just a quick follow on. So do you guys host these, or do you look for people to host them in local spaces?
So we started with us hosting it, but it's growing so much. We're looking for people to host too. So if you're interested in hosting, if you want to do it virtual or in person, we'll give you the playbook. It's a really simple formula and anyone can do it. And, we sort of have a intro and a closing just to make sure that everybody feels seen and heard. And it's expanding rapidly to the point it's becoming very much its own organization. So
I love it.
Thank you for asking. Yeah.
We did things a little bit out of order. You already answered one of the final questions, but I want to ask you one more.
I did my homework. Yeah.
So if you could get the truth about any question about your life or future, I can't give you the truth. What question would you ask?
I would love to know if I have been able to have the impact I hope for. So is what I'm doing actually leading to what I hope it will do, which is to, of course, create a kinder and healthier world for all. So that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Harding. This has been wonderful. And I'm going to reach out to you about Our Kind of Club, and maybe I can host one in the Berkeley, Oakland area. That'd be super fun. Thank you so much for coming on.
We would love that. And also thank you for your kindness, because this was our second attempt at this, and I really appreciate the second chance. So thank you, Jonathan.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at mindful.money. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/mindfulmoney. We'll be sure to read those out on future episodes.